There are some people in the GameMaker community who I just can't believe still want to talk to me. And among those people is Mr. Gleb Saratelli, primarily because I am incapable of going more than a few weeks without making jokes about his profile picture on Discord. Anyway, of relevance to us today is the fact that Gleb works on this little project called GMRoomLoader. And GMRoomLoader is an extension which allows you to load rooms in GameMaker. And just saying it like that maybe undersells what it does a little bit, because like room go-to is something that you'll probably learn about within about an hour of picking up the engine on average. Anyway, one of the long-standing limitations of GameMaker as a whole is that you can't exist in more than one room at once. It's not possible to do things like, so if you imagine games like the DS and Game Boy generation of Pokemon games, you can, in some places, walk from one map to another without going through a loading screen, and when you, for example, leave Pallet Town from the north, Route 1 will just be right there, and you'll be able to walk from one map to another without going through a loading screen or anything like that. That is not something that you can do easily in GameMaker, at least not out of the box. And GMRoomLoader is an extension which will do some tricks which will allow you to do things like that. It's the kind of thing that most people are surprised to learn that GameMaker just can't do out of the box, and like the rest of us just have learned to not think about it. Anyway, so if you want to pick up GMRoomLoader, come over to the GitHub page where it lives. There's also an itch.io page if you prefer playing around on there. I'm going to go and get it from GitHub, so go to the releases section, and if you grab, currently 2.1.0 is the most recent release. There's version 2.0 recently came out, which is why Gleb asked me if I was interested in making a video on this. There's a couple things in the asset list over here. There's the YYMPS, 2.1.0.YYMPS, that is the actual extension file. Which we want, and then there's a couple demo projects, and I'll look through one of the demo projects briefly before getting into things on our own. I'm going to go and right-click open. No, not that. Open this in Explorer so that I can like drag it into GameMaker later. Let's see. So, to give you a visual idea of how this is going to work, I am going to run one of the sample projects, and if I go in here, there is RM example right here. So this is a room. It's got some of the usual GameMaker room things: a background layer, a like tile layers for these, like the terrain here. We've got some objects which will move back and forth. No, do we not? Oh, they're on the wrong layer. Gleb, your sample project is not organized correctly. But that's going to be our target room. If I actually run this, we're going to see a blank orangey creamy window. We can say press 1 to load the room centered at the mouse position. We can say press 2 to unload the room. And if we press 1 multiple times in a row, we're not going to get multiple copies of the room. We're going to unload the last copy and then reload the new one. And this is like, for all intents and purposes, this is the actual room embedded inside another room. This is all of the tile layers, the background layers, all of the objects, everything like that. And we have just, without actually entering the room, from our starting default area, which is this empty window here, we are just spawning in the room at the location of the mouse cursor. And that is fairly simple on the surface, but it does afford you a lot of really interesting different things that you can do. Procedural generation, at least in some capacity, seems to be the other big thing that people use this for. Because I like to make games with a camera perspective that benefit from this, I am most interested in the seamlessly walking from one map to another element, but your mileage may vary. Anyway, how exactly this works, there's only a couple of functions that need to be called to do this. As you can see, if you go and look through the sample project, which is here, a lot of the code is actually related to the demo itself and not to the actual loading of the room, which is interesting. So if I come over to the test project that we'll be using in here, this is a modified version of my usual 2D sample project. You may have seen it in videos that I've made in the past. I like to use it for a lot of things. This is going to give us a little basic gameplay arena where we can do things like walk down with a top-down perspective. We can do things like talk to NPCs, and they will say silly things to us. That's enough of that, I think. If you were to walk to the edge of the room, the camera would stop and you would keep going. There is no, this is all there is, what you see in this room here. There's also just grass that spawned in. And I have spawned those not by placing grass objects in the room editor individually, but by randomly generating them in these rectangles. And that's because there's a couple of things that I want to draw attention to later in the video. We'll get to that when we get to that. Anyway, in addition to the starting room, there's a couple of others. Room 0_1 here is going to be another room that's going to live, if you think about placing these rooms like on a grid. This is the main one. This is going to live to the south. 1_0 is going to live to the east. 1_1 is going to live to the southeast. If you imagine stitching these all together, if you follow the path, you'll basically just have a circle that you can walk around. And each of them have some grass, some NPCs, and some things like that inside them. By the end of the video, we'll have something like this, what you see on screen right now. It's going to be very exciting. First, I'm going to have to actually add it to the project. And if we go into our downloads folder, where we downloaded it earlier, you can take the YYNPS and just drag it into the GameMaker IDE to import the asset package. And you can just click add all. Most of it lives inside this folder. The rest of it, well, the only included file is the license file, which we're going to include because that's the polite thing to do. And just like that, now the extension is part of our game. So I'm going to make a potentially dubious decision and show things breaking before I show them working. So if I go over to the player object, this is not where this code is going to live ultimately, but I do want to show things breaking in a major way because this is going to be one of those things that you're going to have to watch out for. In the player object, I can initialize our room in GMRoomLoader by saying roomLoader.data init, and we can give that an argument of, let's load the room 1_0 to the east of us first. When you use this, you're going to initialize the room and then do that separately from loading. When we want to actually load the room, roomLoader.load room 1_0, and the .load method of roomLoader is going to also take a coordinate where the room is going to spawn. So since 1_0 is going to, like, if you take this whole thing as like a stamp and you stamp it down to the east of this, the coordinate where you want the upper left is going to be room width, or the width of the starting room, and then 0 on the y-axis. So room 1_0, room width 0. And if I run the game now, things are going to explode spectacularly. And this is a bit of a busier error message than you might be used to in GameMaker, and that is because we have gone and created a lovely little Stack Overflow. Because the way that I've set it up here, the object that is calling the code that initializes and loads a room also happens to exist in the target room that is being loaded. And when it is created, because again, all the tile layers and background layers and object layers and everything that exist in the room are loaded and instantiated, as soon as the player is loaded in the second room, it's going to go through the routine of doing the whole thing over again. It's going to spawn another copy of the room, and we have here a recursive system that will never end, and the game will just crash. There's two ways around that. The easy way is to just delete the player object from the second room, and also the third room, and also the fourth room, and to only have one copy of the player object in the starting room, and to basically assume that the player is a persistent object in this case. And that is a solution. If we run the game now, well, it won't crash, which is a step in the right direction. Probably the better solution for this is, most likely at some point you're going to find yourself in want of some kind of OBJ game controller or something like that. Some kind of persistent controller object that sort of lives in the background. It's probably going to be invisible. It probably doesn't actually have to draw anything, but it will handle background tasks, such as like game state management and that kind of thing. In this case, this is where I'm probably going to want to dump the room loader code. So instead of actually putting this in the player object, we can go cut and paste that, stick that in the create event of this obj_game controller. And if I go and toss one of these in the corner of the starting room, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter if we have multiple copies of the player running. Well, it does matter if we have multiple copies of the player running around, because that's a kind of ridiculous thing to do, but it's not a problem in the sense that it'll just crash your game. Anyway, when I do this, nothing's going to change, and our game will run as normally. So we're going to run into a second problem here, which is that if I run off to the right of the screen to where the room that I spawned should have been, we're not actually going to be able to like see it, and it does still exist. And you can actually see like the very edge of one of these objects, and we saw this NPC run in from the side. where the room spawned in, but we can't actually like go there ourselves in a meaningful way. And that is because in this sample project I have set up so that we have a we're using one of the GameMaker default views. And one of the rules of GameMaker's view and camera systems that you can just set up in the room editor is that they can't actually go outside the bounds of the room. And normally that's like fine, mostly, because you probably don't really have much outside the bounds of the room anyway. But if you're going to start loading adjacent rooms, and if you're going to start walking seamlessly from one adjacent room to another, then you're suddenly going to need to be able to do that, and suddenly GameMaker's view and camera system isn't actually really going to be that useful to you. So this is one of those things that you can just do without thinking about, usually, in GameMaker when you use it normally. But it is not something that you can just use and not think about when you're using GMRoomLoader and walking between rooms like this. So I'm going to leave like the definition of like the width and the height and the view following and that kind of thing. I'm going to leave that alone. But I am going to go into the, let's go into the step event of obj_player here. And this is the code that handles like movement and grass shaking and that kind of thing. If I go down to the bottom of it, we can do a little bit of taking over GameMaker's camera system manually. So to set the position of a GameMaker camera manually, we can say var camera equals view get camera, and this is going to get the GameMaker camera that is associated with view index 0 in the room. By the way, I should set this to the object following specifically to none, because I don't want GameMaker to do anything automatically that might conflict with what I'm doing here. Probably should have mentioned that earlier. Anyway, we are going to want to camera set view position, and this is going to manually set the coordinates where the view camera lives. We're going to need an X and a Y. However, we're also going to want to like subtract half of the size. We're going to subtract. Actually, let me just show what happens if I don't do that. So if I just set the camera position to the player like this, it's going to set the position to the players of the upper left of the player's XY, which we don't really want. We do want to subtract half of the width and the height of the view so that the player is centered. And to do that, we can say var camera width equals camera get width. Is it camera get view width? It is camera get view width of the camera that we tied to the view. For camera height equals camera get view height of that camera, and then we can say camera set view position x minus camera width divided by 2, y minus camera height divided by 2. And if I now run the game, we can see that the camera is indeed centered on the player, which is what we want. And more importantly, if I walk off the side, we can see that we can come over here. We've got the part of the room that was spawned in, so we've got room 1_0 as we were hoping for. It's got some grass, it's got some tiles. If I talk to the NPCs, we can see that they have things to say. Indeed, each one of these NPCs I did give unique text. So I hope you all enjoy tracking them down and finding out what they have to say. I didn't mean to close that. There is a slight problem, because if I walk up the top of the screen, we've got this lovely Windows 95 effect. Good chunky are probably not old enough to remember that, but we can see that we've got some interesting looking smearing going on when we walk around at the top of the screen, and that is because in my sample project, this is one of those things that doesn't matter if you're just using GameMaker rooms like normal and your camera can never look outside of a room, but you might want to make sure that you're actually like clearing the screen, like erasing whatever was on the screen before when you draw your scene. And there's a couple ways to do that. The easiest way is going to be to go into GameMaker's room properties and click the clear viewport background box, and that should give us just a solid black fill if you walk outside the room. This is probably good enough in most cases. In code, you can also call like the draw clear function or something. We do that a lot in the world of 3D. You can also, if you don't want to say clear viewport background, you can just go and create a background layer and give it like a solid black fill or something like that. So when you draw stuff on the screen, it won't necessarily erase what was there before unless you like ask it to. Normally something like the background fill layer or the automatically clearing the viewport background or something like that would do that for you. It's just something you might want to keep in mind. Again, we walk off the side of the room and we've got a solid black fill color. All right. I think that's all the major pieces of weirdness that I wanted to address. We can extend the amount of fun that we're having here by going into the OBJ game controller, and we can also load, in addition to 1, 0, we can load 0, 1, and we can load rooms 1, 1. I'm going to just go and position these. So 0, 1 is going to be to the south of us, so we want that coordinate to be 0, and room height. Again, if you were to like plot this out on a piece of paper, the coordinate system where the rooms are spawning, the room to the south would be 0 and room height, and room 1, 1 would be room width and room height, because we want the upper left corner of that room to spawn over here, which is the going to correspond to the width and the height of the starting room. I'm only going to deal with 4 rooms here, but if you were to have even more like tacked onto this, you would need to position your rooms accordingly. If it makes it easier, you could take a sheet of graph paper and just like draw them out by hand and try to plot out where the coordinates are going to be. Anyway, if I do this, we can walk to the south, and we've got these NPCs. These are a different set of NPCs than what we had before. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Your text is flowing off the screen. That's going to bother me if I talk to any more NPCs. Let me actually fix that. That can be found in Draw GUI over here. When I say draw text color, I want that to be draw text extended color, and we can give the separation -1, and the width can be window, width minus 64 or so, and that should keep the text in the bounds of that rectangle. This doesn't have anything to do with GMRoomLoader. I just forgot to do it when I set this up earlier. Alright, that looks better. We've now got rooms being loaded. So, one more thing that I'd like to go over, and this isn't by any means all that there is to GMRoomLoader. I would like to make at least one more video about this in the future because it is a fun topic. Should you want to unload a room in the same way that we were doing in Gleb's sample project when you like hit the 2 key to delete a room or whatever, should you ever want to unload a room, it's going to be pretty easy to do that. So the roomloader.load method will return a reference to an object that basically contains everything that exists within a room. So all the objects, tiles, etc. And by naming convention, Gleb was calling it the payload, and I don't have anything better to name it. And I think that's kind of funny because it sounds like it's going to explode. But if I say payload 1_0 equals roomloader.load room 1_0, payload 0_1 equals that room, and payload 1_1 equals the last room. This is going to be a couple of references to all the things that exist within a room, and if you ever wanted to delete a room, we could go into, for example, the step event of obj_game controller, and we can say something like if payload 1_0 is not equal to undefined, we can say payload 1_0 dot cleanup, and the room is gone. The room is going to be unloaded. We're probably going to want to reset this or unset it to undefined or something like that so that we can't do it again, because if we did, the game would crash. And we can also we can do this for all the other ones too. In my case, because they're all loaded at once, and if you hit the yeah, you know what? We should do that. If keyboard check pressed VK enter, do that. Don't just like execute it every step because that would be silly. Anyway, payload 1_0 dot cleanup, payload 0_1 dot cleanup, and payload 1_1 dot cleanup. And this is going to allow us to walk around to unload a room when we hit the enter key. If I do that, most of the stuff on screen is gonna go away. There is a slight problem with this. There's actually 2 different slight problems with this. One of them is pretty straightforward. I believe I mentioned this at the beginning, but since the grass objects are being spawned dynamically, GMRoomLoader will only keep track of the objects that were loaded in from the rooms directly. And since the grass objects were then spawned later by these big pale green spawner objects, those won't actually be tracked by GMRoomLoader. So the way that these work is they just go and spawn a bunch of objects within a random space somewhere in that rectangle, and we are not doing anything by means of like keeping track of them. And if you wanted them to be deleted when you unload a room, these spawner objects will be destroyed. For example, in the way that I have set this game up here, these will be destroyed when you unload a room. And we probably want to keep track of the grass that we spawn, so we can just put that in an array. Like this, so we can save a reference to all those instances. And then in something like the cleanup event, we can iterate over that array of grass objects and instance destroy grass as index I, so all of those sub-objects that have been spawned dynamically will be destroyed. Any object that you spawn in at runtime after you load a room, you will want to probably give that treatment, so that, like, if you have an NPC that, like, fires a bullet or something, like, the bullet won't keep existing. Unless you want it to keep existing for whatever reason. That's allowed too. Anyway, so that got rid of the grass objects. We still have the NPCs, and this is a persistent headache. Most of you are probably not going to run into this, because this is an artifact of some very old, weird GameMaker jankiness from a long time ago that still exists in this project. Any GameMaker project that was created more recently than like 2022, this will be off by default. But if you go into your game options, and if you go into your main game options, if you go into the deprecated behaviors tab, make sure the enable copy on write behavior for arrays checkbox is unchecked, because for various reasons, which are stupid and weird and I don't really feel like getting into, checking that box will break GMRoomLoader. Like I said, most of you are probably not going to run into that, but just on the off chance that you do, uncheck that box, and now when you run the game, if you try to unload a room, objects won't randomly be left behind anymore. Because that is a... Man, I still can't believe copy on write was ever a thing in the first place in GameMaker. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. GMRoomLoader is a lot of fun. There are a lot of other things you can do with it besides this. Again, I do want to make another video on it someday. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. If you want my sample project, or if you want GMRoomLoader itself, I will put links to all those things down in the description of the video. I do like to make videos on weird stuff you can do in GameMaker, so if anything like this, or 3D stuff, or whatever appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places. You should all go check out Wizard Ducks and the Lost Hat, which is one of the games that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. Link to that can be found down below as well. I really wish GMRoomLoader existed when I started working on that, because I would have had so much fun doing exactly this in that game, but unfortunately it's too late. And I don't want to go back and rewrite like the entire room management system that is in that game at this point in time, so I'll use it in a future game. Anyway, I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, Squarecrow, Spy Games, Pixelated Pope, Manta Ray, GameMaker, GameArt Indie, Edward Holt, DJ Gibbles, and Bokeh for supporting these videos. If you want to contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.